Tonight's topic is populism, which is when a leader or a movement claims to speak for ordinary people against a real or imagined corrupt elite or perceived enemy. Populism is characterized by a simplistic and often emotional appeal to the public. It sometimes includes unrealistic promises and often includes opposition to established institutions, normals, or expertise. Populist movements are often driven by economic hardship, cultural anxieties, or the feeling of being ignored by the establishment. Sometimes there is a democratic motive, like anti-corruption protests or labor movements demanding fairness. Sometimes it's dangerous when it just fuels anger, conspiracy, and blind loyalty to a strongman. Populism flourishes where people feel ignored, anxious, or humiliated. It can empower or it can destroy. Now, with the stakes set, let's listen to the thoughts of 4 historically influential thinkers as represented by our 4 guests who will speak on their behalf. Professor Jameson will represent Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Professor Engels will represent Noam Chomsky. Professor Timber will represent Erich Hoffer, and Professor Sanders speaks for Hannah Arendt. Let's listen in as they debate tonight's topic, populism in the 21st century.
Hegel's position is that in every era, populism rises when the political institutions fail to reflect the will and dignity of the people. Today, we see vast groups, working-class voters in the United States, rural communities in Europe, rejected youth in parts of Latin America, who feel abandoned by their government. They look around and see a political class speaking a different language than citizens. They see technocrats and algorithms making decisions without their participation. They see cultural changes that ignore their values, and they see economic systems that treat them as disposable. Populism is their cry. We exist, we matter, listen to us. But this energy is like a storm. It must be channeled through responsible institutions and reason. If not, it dissolves into mob rule or paves the way for demagogues. The task is to reform institutions so they can contain and harness this force, not exploit it or suppress it.
Chomsky would point out that it's reassuring to speak in the language of dignity and representation, but this modern populism that we are discussing, especially in the United States, Hungary, Brazil, India, is not simply a spontaneous cry from the people. It is cultivated, it's manufactured. Powerful political strategists deliberately shape anger to distract from the real sources of frustration of citizens, such as inequality, corporate domination, declining public services, and the hollowing out of democracy. Instead of addressing material problems such as wages, healthcare, and housing, to cite a few examples, they offer enemies such as immigrants, journalists, professors, minorities, and imaginary conspirators. Both online venues and traditional media host actors that amplify emotion, not truth, which amplifies anger, and those who fund and exploit this anger do so in part to avoid economic reforms that might threaten their own wealth and power. Whatever the method or objective, this amplification of anger gives rise to public mistrust that often morphs into anti-elite and anti-government movements.
Hoffer would counter by pointing out that you're describing manipulation, but manipulation only works when there's already hunger. People don't join mass movements only because they're poor, misled, or even angry. They join because they feel insignificant. Modern life, with its isolation, rapid change, and insecurity, leaves people feeling like insignificant dots in a chaotic universe. But movements give meaning. They replace a confused and fragile individual identity with something grander, such as a nation, a cause, a crusade, a tribe. That is intoxicating. This explains both the ugliest populism and the noblest social movements. People want to dissolve into a purpose. And once inside, they listen and obey. They surrender thinking because belonging feels safe and meaningful. You can't defeat populism by fact-checking it. Facts are not the issue, emotion is. People seek purpose, dignity, and a way to feel part of something bigger than themselves. The alternative is the risk that they'll find meaning in destruction.
Ardent's position is that purpose alone can be dangerous. Totalitarian movements offer purpose too, a dark purpose, but a purpose nevertheless. The danger begins not only when people feel small, or dots as my esteemed colleague put it, but when they lose their grip on truth itself, which nurtures a destructive approach to purpose. In the 21st century, we see echoes from the past, such as facts dismissed as elitist opinion, lies repeated until they feel true, and reality replaced by spectacle. When loyalty to a leader or group matters more than truth, thinking collapses. And when thinking collapses, freedom collapses soon after. People lose their ability to discern fact from fiction and become primed to only follow. That is the path to tyranny, whether under a dictator, a party, or even an algorithmic authority. The issue is not only that people want meaning, but that they are willing to trade their judgment for it. Constructive activism requires effort. It requires thinking, doubting, engaging in political activity, not as a fan, but as a citizen.
But isn't the very point of education and institutions to cultivate the capacity for constructive participation as citizens? You speak of individual responsibility, and rightly. But we cannot demand that every citizen become a political expert or a philosopher. They need structures that guide them toward rational and constructive participation, especially when facing very real personal issues that can erode personal dignity.
Institutions can nurture public reason, or they can crush it. Bureaucracies can become machines of obedience enforced by codified laws. Schools can teach conformity instead of thought. Even democracies can drift into passive spectatorship, where citizens consume politics as entertainment as leaders appear uninformed and seemingly of little risk. As societies in history have shown, freedom dies in such conditions. Freedom is fragile. It requires constant, active participation, not just voting every few years. It requires public space where people can speak, challenge, and listen. It requires leaders to promote discourse to empower the people with a better option than destructive action. Without this space to practice freedom, mistruths flourish in the vacuum of enforced silence, and movements radicalize around mission objectives that are invented by a misinformed and disgruntled minority.
And for that public space to matter, people need real power. They need economic security. They need incentive to explore options. They need access to truthful information and the guidance to know the difference between a truth and a lie. A citizen juggling two jobs is not deliberating political theory. A citizen struggling to pay their bills is prone to vote for a candidate that promises some financial relief. A public fed a constant diet of outrage by institutions that profit from bad news cannot calmly weigh truth, and it's folly to expect any other result. Whoever controls information shapes reality, and that reshaped reality is not likely to empower people.
And whoever controls meaning shapes loyalty. You all assume people crave rational participation. However, it must be recognized that many crave escape from responsibility. The desire to be absorbed into a cause, to become a true believer, is deep. Give them a mission that sounds noble, even if ill-founded, and the cause itself becomes the point. Give them an enemy, and they are motivated. Give them certainty, and they will gladly abandon doubt.
Which is why cultivating judgment is the highest political task. Not obedience, not blind unity, but judgment, because judgment facilitates thinking to discern the difference between what is constructive political activism and what is destructive political activism.
And without economic justice, public judgment can be purchased by profit-focused institutions and power-hungry leaders, each of which take advantage of those in the grips of economic insecurity.
And without healthy personal meaning, many will surrender judgment entirely to belong to a movement based on the dogma of an angry but convincing minority, only to become ensnared by a movement that is intoxicating.
And yet without shared purpose and institutions, judgment fragments into the noise of conflicting and often baseless information that can't be trusted even if that noise contains valuable gems of truth.
The thoughts of four thinkers who wish to better understand the human condition, each contributing to a fuller picture of our important topic this evening. Hegel views populism as a warning that institutions have stopped serving the people and calls for renewal and unity. Chomsky argues populism today is largely engineered by elites to distract and divide, and insists on democratizing power. Hoffa takes the position that the heart of populism is emotional hunger, belonging, identity, release from doubt and uncertainty. Arendt warns that when truth collapses and loyalty replaces thinking, populism becomes fertile ground for tyranny. As illustrated tonight, populism is not only politics. It is psychology, economics, identity, truth, dignity, and fear, all entangled and all important for a society to thrive. And in our century, whether it becomes renewal or ruin depends not only on leaders or media or institutions, but on whether people can hold on to truth, good judgment, and responsibility in a world that constantly tempts them to surrender those abilities. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you a good evening.